Shalom and welcome to Secrets of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you very, very much for joining us. The issue of love and kindness, especially in this world in which we are living, is a subject that we're going to talk a little bit about today. In fact, we're going to talk a lot about it today with one of the leading experts in this field. And to that extent, we'd like to welcome back to Secrets of Meaning, Dr. Stephen Post, Director of the Center for Medical Humanities, Compassion, Care, and Bioethics at the Renaissance School of Medicine at Stony Brook University up in Long Island, and the author of this brand new book called Pure Unlimited Love, Science and the Seven Paths to Inner Peace. Dr. Post, welcome back to Secrets of Meaning. How are you doing? How are you feeling? It's nice to see you again.
Well, Rabbi Richard, it is a delight to see you again.
I'm very thankful about this book. It's almost like, as we say in Yiddish, besher, that it comes at a time then we really need it. I mean, it's the beginning of a new year, secular new year, and we're just overwhelmed with so many things, as we were talking about before we started. And so I thank you for joining us. You actually have at the beginning, in your introduction, a definition of love that I want to quote, and it's a good place to start before we get to the Dalai Lama. Not to put the Dalai Lama in any different place, but here we go. You write, "What is pure unlimited love?" And your answer is, pure love in its undifferentiated essence is this: when the security and well-being of another is as real or meaningful to us as our own, and sometimes even more so, we are within the field of love. That's a kind of a really meaty sentence. What does that mean?
You know, it's commonsensical. It doesn't rely on a lot of ancient languages. It's something that I think everybody can understand. When the happiness and the security of another is as real or meaningful to you as your own, and sometimes more so, you love that person. So that's the definition. And unfortunately, if we look at the actions in the world of late, there are many people who are terribly biased to the degree of being murderous against various populations, I'm sorry to say, including people of Jewish background. And so this is not an easy thing to get to. You know, Immanuel Kant talked a lot about altruism, and he said ultimately the moral life, the categorical imperative, has to do with realizing that the things that we think differentiate us from them and therefore allow us to be exclusive and cruel and murderous, that those things don't hold up to logic. And we're seeing an awful lot in today's world that has no grounding in logic. Most of the differences, I would say almost all the differences that we think exist between us and them, evaporate under the power of careful discussion and reasoning. But in our classrooms today, and this is very tragic, we don't do the kind of reasoning that we need to do. Before people really sit down and debate, I oftentimes have my students take positions that they disagree with and defend them to their best effort with great respect before they move on from that. It's kind of like the Guide for the Perplexed or whatever. It's a medieval style of philosophizing. But now in the classrooms in America, before we actually discuss and think, we judge and condemn. That's what's going on. And so many young people just don't know any better than to falsely condemn, harangue, and even violently attack groups that are not like theirs.
There's a lot of fear around this, isn't there?
There is a lot of fear. And, you know, ultimately, I have to say that I'm a realist about human nature. I think there's goodness in human nature, but I also feel that we need to have a spiritual source in our lives. And so there's another definition of pure love in that chapter, which I got from my wonderful colleague, Jeffrey Trilling, a relative, by the way, of Lionel Trilling of old. And I asked Jeff, who's a very mystical, thoughtful guy, I said, Jeff, what about pure unlimited love? And he paused and he looked down and he said, pure unlimited love is the first thing we see when we close our eyes for the last time, comma, hopefully. And there he was talking more metaphysically about love and about the wonderful experiences. I've written a lot about some of the great artists like Chagall, who had incredibly profound spiritual experiences, which animated their desire to love in their painting. So Chagall called blue the color of love after he saw a blue angel when he was sleeping one night in the streets of St. Petersburg, which itself was very anti-Semitic at the time, and he wound up in jail twice. But I have to just say that I'm not surprised at their hatred in our world, but I don't think we can overcome it based on reason alone, although reason is important, as for the reasons we just discussed. But there has to be some kind of a renewal, a spiritual renewal that focuses on a shared and a common humanity.
But it's got to be more than just the Beatles. All you need is love, right?
Oh, it does. Yes, it absolutely does. And so the question is how do we express it? Because, I like the Beatles, don't get me wrong.
No, who doesn't? I mean,
You know? But I come into work every morning and I've usually prayed. I'm a graduate of the University of Chicago Divinity School and studied with Samuel Sandmel and all sorts of wonderful people, but also studied a lot of psychology. When Csikszentmihalyi was writing his book Flow, I was his helper. And he would often get over to the Divinity School because he knew when you got into these moments of flow and creativity, when hatred and time and space seemed to disappear, that you could find your way into a safer zone. For me, it's the expressions of love that I like to concentrate on. I come into my office here at Stony Brook. I direct a center. I head a division of medicine and society that helps with all the immigrants who are out in Eastern Long Island picking potatoes or picking grapes or whatever they do now. And I just feel as though every morning I have to pray, I have to meditate, and then come into work not talking about love because it's so far away. Is it love of chocolate? Is it love of designer jeans? Not that I have anything wrong with anything against those things, but it's not the kind of love that we're talking about. And so I ask myself, given the people I know I'm going to encounter today that I'm responsible for in leadership role, how can I respond to them with the form of love that they really need? So maybe somebody's son has just relapsed into addiction, and I know about that. So what I want to do is I want to come in here and I want to address that with compassion and creativity. How about a physician who maybe has seen a patient die unnecessarily because he or she missed a pretty obvious diagnosis? Then I need to do forgiveness with them. And I will often quote Martin Luther King, who famously said, "Those who make no mistakes make nothing." And sometimes people, I know they're getting very off track and they're even thinking about leaving nursing or leaving medicine. And so in those cases, I have to go with what I call carefrontation. That's not an original word with me. M. Scott Peck, who is my great buddy, who wrote The Road Less Traveled, he invented that. It's in that book. And I taught at Case Western for 20 years, overlapped, by the way, for 10 years with Susanna Heschel, and who was in the arts and sciences, of course. But Carefrontation means for Scotty, who was a graduate of Case Medical School and went on to write his bestseller, The Road Less Traveled, Scotty thought we needed something better than confrontation or better than tough love, something that would be more assuring of a continuing relationship and of a commitment longer term to growth and well-being. And so I do a lot of carefrontation when people are about to leave medicine, or a medical student who felt very disappointed because she didn't think she fit into the culture of medical school. She came from a very poor background in Bayside, Queens, and just couldn't quite, she was brilliant, but she didn't quite feel that she could ever make it. And so I spoke with her and I carefronted her. I said, you have a higher purpose. Don't neglect it. You have a calling. Stick with it. So she took a year off, and my wife and I drove into Bayside about every month, and we took her out to a restaurant. She happened to be Korean American. We took her out to a restaurant, and she did some writing assignments for me, which turned out to be not quite publishable, but very, very good, sort of reflective writing. And now she's practicing medicine happily and has a couple of kids in Connecticut. So, you have to think about the people around you. Now, that's the wheel of love, as I have it in the book. Listening. Sometimes people have an obstacle in their creativity, and so they need just a good conversation, some good thinking. I put mirth as an expression of love because, Norman Cousins, who was the great editor for the New York Review of Books years ago, he wrote that great book, bestseller, The Anatomy of an Illness. And he basically claimed, and I think there's some truth to it, that he laughed himself healthy from a very severe case of autoimmune disease. And then he kind of founded or co-founded the field of psychoneuroimmunology, which exists very strongly at the NIH. And he also started his Norman Cousins Institute on laughter at UCLA.
Right. The use of I think he was one of the pioneers of saying it's okay to laugh and have humor, and I think there's been enough studies on what real laughter does in humor to the brain synapses and the changes in some of the biochemistry of the body when you do that. Could you
in a millisecond?
Right.
It's amazing, actually.
So how did the Dalai Lama and you hang out here so that he wrote the beginning, he wrote the foreword? I mean, Dr. Post walks into a bar and there's the Dalai Lama. Does he come here often? And you strike up how did he, there's got to be a nice story here.
Well, he has a very close, devoted friend named Victor Chan, who has co-authored his last couple of books, one on compassion and one on forgiveness. Victor lives in Vancouver, and he runs the only official Dalai Lama Center in North America. So Victor and I go back a ways, and I met Victor one afternoon at the TikTok Diner on 8th Avenue and 34th. And we put together a plan to help His Holiness get the Templeton Prize, which eventually he did get. And I was on a vetting committee for that at the time, not the final committee, but a committee that would put names forward. So I think that was a good start. But more to it, 8 years ago, I was in Bangalore, India, at the Indian Institute for Advanced Studies. And I was talking about deeply forgetful people. I've written a lot of books about people with dementia, but I don't like the word dementia because, like the word retard, it's quite negative. And so I like to speak about people who have deep forgetfulness. It's more respectful, it's more inclusive. And I wrote a book with Johns Hopkins Press 3 years ago called Dignity for Deeply Forgetful People: How Caregivers Can Manage the Challenges of Alzheimer's Disease. And that did very, very well. And we've had a national study with Gallup, and apparently half the primary caregivers in America, this is a random scientific study, prefer deep forgetfulness to dementia, because dementia conjures up these negative metaphors: husk, shell, empty, gone, dead, whatever. But we're all a little deeply forgetful on any given day. Maybe not quite as extensively as we would be under certain disease conditions, but I think it's important to be inclusive and loving. And my test case for love, okay, is not so much love of enemies, because I don't really have enemies. I have adversaries. I've had lots of adversaries. That's one of the reasons I went from Case Western to Stony Brook, although I love Stony Brook. It's a great place. But I had some adversaries who didn't get what I was doing on the theme of unlimited love, and it kind of embarrassed them. But here, there's none of that. So I can be free and I can be myself, and I can write books like Pure Unlimited Love and not worry about getting backsided. So I've had adversaries, but I love them because they bring out the best in me. They always do. I have to figure out how I can overcome that kind of initial negativity, and without getting hyper, without browbeating, without getting nasty, but overcome these moments with love.
We have a concept in Judaism called chesed,
Yes.
which really is translated sometimes as loving kindness.
Yes.
And I'd like to explore with you, because you talk about it in the book, about this idea of kindness, because it seems that we do exist in a world right now where kindness has sort of been put on the back burner. Could you walk me through how you approach this idea of just being kind,
Absolutely.
even
And,
even with an adversary, because you can
even
be
with
kind. Yes, yeah.
yeah. So kindness, I mean, I love the term Hesed, and have used it. I once wrote an article about Abraham Heschel in the Journal of the American Academy of Religion, and Susanna, his daughter, wrote me a beautiful note saying how much she appreciated it. But loving kindness, I mean, love, the concept of love is just so abused in our culture, and people are not sure what you're talking about. That's why I was careful about definitions earlier on. But in the end, kindness is an expression of love in everyday life. It doesn't necessarily have quite the intensity of love, but when I come into work, if I just open the door for somebody, if I just smile at them, if I just ask them, how's the family? Kindness doesn't take a lot. It takes relatively little, but it's incredibly important. And especially with patients, I teach medical students and physicians around here just to be kind. You don't have to study techniques of empathy and techniques of compassion all day, every day, but just come in thinking that you're going to show an interest in the experience that patients are having as people.
I mean, you call kindness in the book a consistent, low key, and simple form of love,
Yes.
which I think is a really lovely. Like you said, it's not Hollywood. It's just walking in and just a smile.
Yeah. Just a smile.
Just a smile can reduce the tension. And I always say sometimes, go have a cup of coffee, sit down and have a meal with somebody, have a cup of coffee.
Yes.
Just see how about that game last night, or how, it's a lovely, just,
Right.
you don't have to immediately go to war.
No, not in the least. And it makes a lot of sense when you're doing anything in life, including, say, a conference call, a Zoom call. Ask somebody, how are you doing? How's your son? How's your daughter? How's your wife? How's your husband? Just ask them a simple little question about their lives, because it changes the tone.
Oh, change. Yes, it does.
So, the first chapter is, every chapter is kind of structured like a mantra. May you give and glow. But it's not just give. There's a lot of work out now on the biochemistry of being a giver. People talk about the helper's high and so forth, but it's kind giving. And it's certainly not how much you give or what you give, but it's the kindness. It's how much of a heart you put into it. And that's what makes all the difference. And so our studies have shown that very clearly. Although again, Rabbi Richard, some people are so caught up in this ideology of I don't do nothing for nothing, that this doesn't get across. I tell a little story in that chapter about this study we published on widows and widowers who had successful marriages and now they're going through grief and bereavement. So what's interesting about that is that the ones who could self-report that they were helping others, not necessarily officially volunteering, but were helping others informally, they were getting through grief and bereavement more quickly and in a more lasting fashion. So I got a call from the New York Society of Widows and Widowers about that. There is such a thing. And they said, we're having a meeting in Manhattan. Could you come in and give a talk? So I came in. It was a pretty big ballroom. And I gave a talk about how people who were givers felt less stress, felt happier, felt physically healthier, felt more resilient and able to deal with loss and disappointment. I talked about that. And I said, it's not tit for tat. It's not transactional. It's just internal. And it's for your own benefit as well as theirs. Not necessarily your own primary benefit, but that's an after effect or a side effect. This guy in the back of the room, he was waving his hand quite frantically. And I called him and he's the one who said, I don't care what you say, buddy. I don't do nothing for nothing. I said, well, look, but I mean, there are these advantages and you need to take them into account. Wilhelm de Kooning, the great abstract expressionist, was always getting in fistfights in Greenwich Village, and his art was so full of anxiety. But he actually was diagnosed with probable Alzheimer's disease, and he went through that for 14 years. But for 13 and a half years, he still painted, and he would dip his brush in acrylic in his studio in Greenwich Village, and he'd walk up to the easel, and he would paint, and it was a lot more peaceful. It was kind of like Georgia O'Keeffe. It was relatively tranquil compared to what he had done earlier in life. So I don't know if he maybe got liberated from some of those very negative myths, but at any rate, I like his later work a lot.
The a lot of the focus of the book is, to extrapolate about that happiness and joy and there's been enough studies about people who are doing mitzvot, the deeds of loving kindness, that they get more out of it in the long run. There's a story about Route 80 West.
Route 80, yeah.
And it kind of illustrates, I think, a lot of the themes. Could you walk us through it? Do you remember that story?
Oh, yeah. It's my origin story. I was not an angel as a kid. I grew up in Babylon, Long Island, and I went to St. Paul's School in New Hampshire for high school, which is a little bit of a hoity-toity type place. But even there, I was very much into world religions. When I was 15, I had a repeating dream of a road to the west. And it was very murky. I couldn't see more than a few feet. But to my left, I could make out the contours of the face of a young guy with long blonde hair. And an angel came into the dream, a woman with a beautiful voice. And she said, if you save him, you too shall live. And that's where I really got started on spirituality. I loved teaching. I was teaching French Canadian kids in Concord, New Hampshire, and loved doing that. And I kind of discovered my calling. There's a chapter on callings. All a calling is trying to make your life's work based on what you know you love doing. It's the give and glow, but every day. And so that you blur the line between play and work as much as you can. It's not easy to do. It won't be perfect, but you want to have that. So I wanted to be a teacher, and I'm a professor to this day. My parents were upset because I wanted to spend that first summer before college in the Bronx tutoring kids, and my mother and father thought it was too dangerous. I don't know if you remember W&J Sloan's department store. My dad was the president of that on Fifth Avenue, and they just didn't want to take risks with their young son. So he got me a job in Bill DeBono's lampshade factory, cutting cardboard, which I did for 2 weeks until I was so annoyed by it that I went out to West Hampton Beach to visit some of my friends. And I took my dad's Mercedes 190, which was secondhand and not in very good shape.
But a great car.
Yeah, great car. I just drove west down the Sunrise Highway across Manhattan, over the George Washington Bridge, and the first sign I saw was Route 80 West. And in the dream, that the road was going to the west. I knew that. It was just intuitive. So that's how I got started. And I didn't really steal my dad's car, but I wanted to turn back. I got out into Pennsylvania at the exit by Lewisburg and Bucknell College, where my daughter would eventually go to school. And I wanted to turn around over the Midway and get back home and restore my reputation. But it was too late because the generator broke. And so all I could do was go over on the right. And I didn't know what to do. There were no cell phones back then, no telephone booths around. So I took a piece of paper out of the glove compartment, this is in the book, and verbatim here. And I wrote a note to the Pennsylvania State Police. Please return this car to Henry A.V. Post, 44 Davison Lane East, West Islip, New York, 516-669-5655 from his son, Stephen, who no longer works in the lampshade factory. And then I put my thumb out and I got a ride out west, and I'll leave it there.
Okay.
Went out to Reed College, and Steve
Oregon,
Jobs
right.
slept on my floor, and we read the autobiography of a yogi. And it's a wonderful, wonderful journey. Sometimes you just have to take gambles to stick with your callings. That's why I like Chagall so much, because he had to run away from home. Small Russian village right on the border of Russia. And his dad pickled herring. That was the family business. And he wanted to be an artist. He wasn't sure why, but he just felt called to it. So he ran away when he was 17, and he went to St. Petersburg. And, 15 years later, he wrote a book called My Life when he was in Moscow. And he talked about how he really got started as an artist. He was sleeping on a big old couch in the alley, and he looked up and he saw a blue angelish like cloud, something very blue and very profound. And it was very peaceful for him. And then it alighted. But the next day he went out and he did his great painting, one of his first paintings of the apparition, which is, Blue Angel. And even when he, look at all the stained glass windows in Chicago or in the UN, it's all blue angels. And he thought blue was the color of love. And he was Jewish, but he loved to use the symbols of other religions as well and sort of incorporate them somewhat eclectically. But he was always committed to Judaism. And when he died in his studio outside of Paris, he was painting a blue angel.
Towards the end, and you have this, it's a complicated quote. Well, so I'm going to read it because I think it touches a theme of the book about us being part of nature. You write, I'm a pro-humanist, which in itself is a pretty cool term, asserting that our dignity lies chiefly in accepting the existing contours of human nature as the fine-tuned gift of evolutionary process, and that biotechnological efforts beyond the therapeutic intended to recreate that nature are arrogant and short-sighted impositions on future generations. First thing that popped into my mind was, where is Dr. Post on the creation of artificial intelligence?
Listen, there's a guy at UCSF in California, very fine psychiatrist. He has coined the term AI psychosis. You can Google it.
No, it's...
Google is being sued by, I believe, 7 families whose young teens have killed themselves.
Right.
They had no history of mental illness, depression, whatever.
It's the new Michael Connelly novel, which is AI. It's exactly what that is.
Yes. And the problem is that it just exacerbates the dehumanization of our lives, especially in vulnerable teenagers. And I think it's a tragedy. So I was at a Templeton board meeting in Montreal this past summer, and I met Jeffrey Hinton, who got the Nobel Prize for AI.
Right.
And he was working for Google. He quit Google, and he went back to the University of Toronto where he now teaches more philosophically. Why? Because he thought there was no way on earth that we could really control the downside of AI.
Wow.
And I believe that. Because I'm in a medical school. And, just the other day, I was looking at a whole lot of reflective essays, and I noticed that a few of them were pretty much the same with slight variations on the theme. But that's happening all across education. It's not only that we aren't teaching people how to think before they judge and hate. We have to teach them how to think and break those problems down. But we also need to teach them how to express themselves, how to write carefully and thoughtfully. And this is not helping. And everyone says, well, hey, we can get control over it. I just don't see it. And Jonathan Haidt has written a best-selling book
Right.
about this. I know him somewhat because he was originally funded by the Templeton Foundation back in the day, 20 years ago. And he's a great mind, a great, great mind. And he just thinks that we need to deprogram people. We need to get them off this stuff, and we need to get it out of the schools, not in the schools, out of the schools, because it's just breaking people down. I hired a physician who got her MD from Stanford by the name of Delaney Rustin, Rustin, to be a documentary medical historian right here in this center. And she came up with the very well-known documentary called Screen Agers, which is just a wonderful documentary about the hellish conflict that's going on in families when parents have to try to monitor their kids' time on these machines.
Yes.
And it's having all kinds of mental health deficits. And that's why I have that chapter. May you cherish the gift of nature. All the great theologians, all the great mystics spent a lot of time in nature. And they didn't worship nature, but they viewed nature as God's creation, called the Garden of Eden or whatever. And that's how our minds evolved. That's how we evolved socially. And I don't want to say that I'm totally anti-technology, but look, Steve Jobs did sleep on my floor at Reed College. And I know that his daughter was never allowed to go near one of those white devices until it was time for her to go to college. And then he thought, well, okay, she really needs one to go to college. A computer. I'm sure it was an Apple. But he himself was a naturalist. He would disappear from the Reed campus and go up north of Portland, where they had these incredibly large apple orchards, the granny apples of Oregon. And they did not have picking machines at the time. So it had to be all done by hand. And he would come back with some money in his pocket, thank heavens, because he needed it, and also a bag full of apples. And if you want to know why apple's apple, I honestly think that's the reason. Somebody might argue about that, but that's what I think.
No, but I think one of the motifs, which is why I wanted to ask you this before we have to end, is really the understanding that we are part of nature.
Yes.
Human beings are part of nature. And then my sense is, and I think you've validated that if you just close yourself off from nature, you isolate your soul, and therefore cut off even an ability to love, which requires an intense, as we started with, a very, very intense type of relationship.
Yeah, and I talk about the 4 loves in this book. There's the love of the divine, there's the love of self, there's the love of neighbor, and there is the love of nature. I've written some other books about love in the past, and one really great Buddhist, Matthew Ricard, very well known, criticized me, and rightly so, for not including love of nature. And so I now really believe that we need to bring that back into the picture in a very powerful way, because without it, we are not going to survive as a species. That's my conviction.
So we've been speaking with Dr. Stephen Post, the author of this brand new book, Pure Unlimited Love. just scratch the surface of this book. It's Dr. Bo, it's available to the on the usual places and the Great God Amazon and
All those kinds of
all
places.
those places, and
Yeah.
probably at a bookstore if you
If you push it. Yeah.
if you push
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Thank you very, very much. I wish you much joy and success with this book, and just most of all, health. Just stay
Well,
healthy and continue to do what you're doing.
thank you. And I'm a great admirer of Jewish thought and the Jewish community. In my Cleveland days, that was the sixth largest Jewish community in America there.
Right.
And I had so many friends in the Jewish community, and I still do. And I just feel very sorry about this anti-Semitism that's going on. And I just feel it's a complete violation of love, and is something that we need to absolutely get control over it, because it's just that bad.
Yes, it's a disease that will spread beyond one particular community. As anybody who has read history knows, that's exactly what happens. So thank you. Thank you, Dr. Post. Stay safe, stay healthy, and continue to do what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Richard. I need your blessings.
Well,
Okay.
you have them, and many, many, many. Tודה rabah. To all
Thank
of
you.
you, thank you for joining us on today's edition of The Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. If you'd like to support our work, we really do appreciate it. If you go to the website, jewishsacredaging.com, you'll find a conveniently located donate button. Just follow the prompts. If you'd like to sponsor some of these podcasts, please just email me rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the Broadcast Center of Lubetkin Media Companies in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and a huge shout out to our tech guru, Steve Lubetkin. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you very, very much for joining us. We are very grateful for your time. Until we meet again on the next Seekers of Meaning, be safe, stay healthy, but most of all, be kind to one another. Shalom.